This is part A of the KhoodeelaarTV television channel, broadcasting at 09:20 hours GMT, 10:20 a.m. in the morning in London, in the quote UK, on Wednesday, the 4th of August 2021. Now, this is the front page of the daily bribing Boris graph, also known as the Telegraph, devoting the front page of the sports supplement about Tokyo and the performance by the British teenager Keely Hodgkinson, who got a bronze yesterday. And she's being celebrated, feted by Fleet Street quite extensively and factually. The point about Keely Hodgkinson taking part, because she's a university student studying criminology. She needed funding, and the point that is being made by the reports, in the reports about her, was that she didn't have the funding usually available from the lottery fund. So she was privately funded by a known, quote, philanthropist who has in the past also funded other participants. And the daily bribing Boris graph has got the main paper's front page also, half, the top half devoted to two other sports persons, and the smaller picture of Kelly Hodgkinson. And we shall be talking about the Fleet Street attitude about sports and British sports team GB. And we shall take a look again, contextually look again at the 2012 staged in East London in 2012, August 2012. Now, the main page, page 1, quote, political news is against Iran on the daily bribing Boris Johnson. And Boris Johnson is being reported elsewhere as well as threatening or having issued a threatening statement against Iran. And we shall be looking at that as well. And the Daily Mail and the Financial Times, both of them cover or refer to the USA in terms of human rights. And the Daily Mail has significantly got a piece, an extended piece, byline to David Rose. David Rose is the one that instantly recognized my voice when I made the phone call to him during the last century. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning David Rose recognizing my voice is because I had never found him until that time, that one time. So the only way David Rose could have recognized my voice would have been by his being working with the various agencies, including the spying agencies, that were intensively and extensively examining my voice, various kind of aspects of my voice. And so instantly recognized my voice and instantly pronounced my name as well. And David Rose is not somebody that is part of the general run of the Fleet Street quote journalists. David Rose is somebody who has been given platform by the Mail on Sunday and the Observer, but he has not been identifying with the general kind of journalists, as far as I can check. But he has been the subject of news himself when he took a leading part in protesting against the references in Fleet Street and in the media generally to the role played by a group of Jews in Germany who were accused of having aided and abetted or colluded or collaborated with the Nazi regime. And there was a play, and I'm speaking from memory, decades on. I think the play was named as having been written by David Edgar, if I'm not mistaken, but this can be checked and appropriate update can be posted. And it was called Partition. So David Rose is not a typical Fleet Street journalist, because most of the journalists in Fleet Street, despite the fact that they are corrupt and they're racist and all the other wrongs that can be attached to them, they don't take the kind of political part as David Rose did in the context of the play called Partition. Let's see if Partition is there as an entry in the online. So the partition is a noun. It's in Christian theology a state of eternal punishment and damnation into which a sinful and unrepentant person passes after death. And the second meaning in the dictionary online is complete and utter ruin. She used her last banknote to buy herself a square meal before partition. And people also ask, where or what is partition? And one is the Christian religion. Partition is defined as a state of eternal punishment you experience after death if you were a sinner who did not repent to God An example of partition is hell. And there are other meanings. Hell, eternal damnation, absolute ruin. So let's see if we can find that particular script. Partition, as I said, without checking or before I checked, David Edgar. There is an entry under the heading The Partition Affair, and it's submitted by Martin on 10th of May 2012, 11:45. When the Royal Court Theatre decided at the last minute not to go ahead with its scheduled production, it's not David Edgar, it's Jim Allen. So it's not David Edgar, it's Jim Allen is being given the name as the play, writer of the play, or the playwright, about the massacre of the Jews of Hungary in 1944. So we are correcting the actual description that I gave earlier before checking the entries. So this is said about the massacre of Jews of Hungary in 1944. Partition, a flood of discussion, polemic, and recrimination was unleashed in the press. It had already been the subject of protests by various prominent Jews and of publicity in the press. Now, the full piece is not short. It's quite a lengthy piece, and it's published on the workersliberty.org. This one says that there are at least two issues involved in the partition affair: artistic freedom and its limits, and whether or not partition is anti-Jewish. Allen and the director Ken Loach immediately raised an outcry against censorship, alleging that they were victims of a coordinated Zionist conspiracy. Partition was being crushed under the Zionist juggernaut, as Jim Allen put it, when he told his side of the story to the Irish Times. They have received immense publicity for their assertion about the Zionist campaign to kill partition. Predictably, the anti-Zionist left, eager for evidence of Zionist conspiracy and Zionist power, rushed to defend partition and echoed the charges. Now, that is 2012, according to the Jewish Chronicle, the Board of Deputies of the British Jews did decide to try, where possible, to prevent the play from being performed. There was an outcry and no doubt private lobbying too. But given the subject of partition and the nature of Allen's treatment of it, that is not surprising, nor necessarily very sinister. The charge of being anti-Semitic is still one that inhabits, and Allen's script does not, as well as we will see, offer the honest reader who is not wearing blinkers much ground on which to build a convincing case that it is not anti-Jewish. So we'll leave it there, because David Rose was also somebody who worked or started working at Time Out. And essentially, David Rose is somebody who is familiar with faith-based hostility and racism. That's the point that is worth mentioning in relation to his piece today in the Daily Mail about the Guantanamo Bay. Now that is Muslims. Guantanamo Bay is a place where Muslims are incarcerated without any trial. So let's go back to the Daily Mail, where it is written, the forgotten prisoners in the jail that shames America. Now, that's a very bold headline. It's a 2-page piece. It's a 2-page piece, and its main write-up, the introduction, reads, the savagery of Guantanamo Bay appalled the world and led Obama to vow to shut it down. Yet, as the United States finally pulls out of Afghanistan, the Mail writer who has been there reveals how dozens are still being held without facing trial. And he, the Mail writer, David Rose, asks, can this really be justice? So the reason why I'm referring to this, as well as the piece in the Financial Times, the Financial Crimes today, at the same time, is because the Financial Crimes on page 4 talks about Afghanistan and the Taliban advance. Now, that's not the real center of the particular piece. The piece is written by a writer called Katrina Manson, who is said to be in Washington. And the other one, additional reporting by Stephanie Finley in New Delhi. Isn't it very significant that the Financial Crimes runs this piece headed US-Pakistan tension rises after Biden criticized that no writer is situated in Pakistan anywhere. And this is typical hostility to a Muslim country. It doesn't have to be Pakistan, any Muslim country. And the fact that Afghanistan is a Muslim country is not incidental. The two countries, Pakistan and Afghanistan, are two of the closest Muslim countries. There are others not far from Iran and other in the northern side. The Pakistan is most important because Pakistan has given refuges to the largest number of Afghans during the last 40 years, and especially in the last 20 years after George W. Bush and Tony Blair invaded Afghanistan, occupied Afghanistan. And there is, of course, the other aspect to the Biden's reaction to Pakistan, because there is an American-led kind of foreign policy push against China. And next door to Pakistan is, of course, India, which in the attack on China is very much an ally of the USA. Now, going back to Pakistan and Pakistan's criticism of Biden being treated by Biden's administration as unforgivable, unacceptable, shows the contempt for this one of the largest Muslim populated countries, that the American State Department, the presidency has. Now, taken together, the numbers of refugees and asylum seekers that physically crossed into Pakistan to save their lives after the Americans invaded and occupied Afghanistan is phenomenally larger, bigger than any other numbers of refugees crossing into the neighboring countries from their own countries of origin, anywhere on the face of the earth in the last few decades. So the costs that the policy of Pakistan has saved the West, the Americans, or American-led, is phenomenal. The Pakistan policy under various regimes has remained the same, accommodating Afghans fleeing Afghanistan. And that can be in the region of trillions of dollars. Now, I have said all of that before I read anything of the actual copy, byline to Katrina Mansion in Washington, and additionally reported by Stephanie Findley in New Delhi, the capital of India. Pakistan's National Security Advisor has complained over US President Joe Biden's failure to contact Prime Minister Imran Khan as Washington seeks help to stop the Taliban taking over Afghanistan following US troops withdrawal. Now, Joe Biden is, of course, another racist, another anti-Muslim racist invader. Although he's removing the American soldiers from Afghanistan, he still remains an invader, as we shall come to see. The cold shoulder from Washington comes as the Taliban has captured swaths of territory across Afghanistan in a ruthless offensive, emboldened by the US pullout. Now, this is, so far the two paragraphs are not peddling Joe Biden, on the face of it anyway. Let's look at the longer third paragraph after that. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani's government has openly criticized Pakistan for supporting the Taliban to secure its strategic interests in the region. Washington leaned on Pakistan in the recent years to helping bring senior Taliban leadership to the negotiating table and secure a deal to exit the country with few attacks on American soldiers. But despite calls from Pakistan's Khan to be a partner for peace, Biden has yet to call since taking office this year. Quote, "The President of the United States hasn't spoken to the Prime Minister of such an important country, who the US itself says is make or break in some cases, in some ways in Afghanistan. We struggle to understand the signal, right?" Moeed Yusuf, Pakistan's National Security Advisor, told the Financial Times in an interview at Pakistan's embassy in Washington. "We have been told every time that the phone call will happen. It's technical reasons or whatever, but frankly, people don't believe it," he said. "If a phone call is a concession, if a security relationship is a concession, Pakistan has options," he added, refusing to elaborate. Pakistan has cultivated deep ties with its iron brother China, which has invested billions in infrastructure projects as part of its Belt and Road Initiative. Now, that is all about Pakistan's embassy. Then the rest of the piece is about America. And the senior Biden administration official said there are still a number of world leaders President Biden has not been able to speak with personally yet. He looks forward to speaking with Prime Minister Khan when the time is right. The diplomatic affront is the latest setback in US-Pakistan relations after their cooperation during the war on terror, after the 9/11 attack on the Twin Towers by Al-Qaeda, the Islamist group founded by Osama bin Laden. In 2004, the US named Pakistan an official major non-NATO ally, spurred by Washington's need for support to fight in Afghanistan. But US administrations have since regularly accused their ally of harboring Taliban insurgents, claimed denied by Pakistan. Now, this is something that has been consistent or even persistent right from the start. Going back to the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, before the revolution in Iran against the Shah, there were two alliances, military-based alliances, fronted and led by the Americans. One was CENTO and the other was SEATO. They were military alliances. And the Shah of Iran, who was invented to destroy democracy, ordinary internationally understood democracy in Iran in the 1950s, when the Iranians had a democratically elected president or prime minister, whatever, Mossadegh. So the CIA wanted to remove Mossadegh because Mossadegh was opposing the Americans looting Iranian oil. So when the coup against the democratically elected Mossadegh took place by the Americans needed nearby countries to form an alliance with, to replace the space that Mossadegh had actually taken up after his democratic victory. So they wanted to remove the democratic mandate that Mossadegh had. And here is a piece about CENTO. It's also called Baghdad Pact. The Central Treaty Organization, originally known as the Baghdad Pact or the Middle East Treaty Organization, METO, M-E-T-O, was a military alliance of the Cold War. It was formed in 1955 by Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, Turkey, and the United Kingdom, and dissolved in 1979. Now, we shall see the actual description. US pressure and promises of military and economic aid were key in the negotiations leading to the agreement, but the United States could not initially participate. John Foster Dulles, who was involved in the negotiations as US Secretary of State under President Dwight D. Eisenhower, claimed that that was due to the pro-Israel lobby and the difficulty of obtaining congressional approval. Others said the reason was for purely technical reasons for budgeting purpose. In 1958, the US joined the military committee of the alliance. It is generally viewed as one of the least successful of Cold War alliances. The organization's headquarters were in Baghdad, Iraq in 1955 to 1958, and in Ankara, Turkey in 1958 to 1979. Cyprus was also an important location for CENTO because of its location in the Middle East and the British sovereign base areas on the island. Modeled after the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that is still active, that is NATO, CENTO committed the nations to mutual cooperation and protection, as well as non-intervention in each other's affairs. Its goal was to contain the Soviet Union by having a line of strong states along the USSR's southwestern frontier. Similarly, it was known as the Northern Tier to prevent Soviet expansion into the Middle East. Unlike NATO, CENTO did not have a unified military command structure, nor were many US or UK military bases established in member countries, etc., etc. So that is a historic kind of reference, because CENTO was not, as the entry itself admits, very successful. But it was part of the American interest against the Soviet Union. But the appearance in Iran of a democratically legitimate elected head like Mossadegh undermined America's interests. And what was happening in Iran about Mossadegh, let's see what this entry said. So Mossadegh is named in this entry as Muhammad Mossadegh. And he was in the 50s, as I said. He was in office from 21st of July 1952. This is the month, to the 19th of August 1953. Okay, so was an Iranian politician who served as the 35th Prime Minister of Iran, holding office from 51 to 53, when his government was overthrown in the 53 Iranian coup orchestrated by United States CIA and the United Kingdom MI6. An author, administrator, lawyer, and parliamentarian, his administration introduced a range of social and political measures such as social security, land reforms, and higher taxes, including the introduction of taxes of the rent on land. His government's most significant policy, however, was the nationalization of the Iranian oil industry, as I said, which had been built by the British on Persian land since 1913 through the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, later known as British Petroleum. Many Iranians regard Mossadegh as the leading champion of secular democracy and resistance to foreign domination in Iran's modern history. Following an initial failed coup by the CIA MI6 backed General Fazlullah Zahedi, the CIA field agent in charge, Kermit Roosevelt, nonetheless defied orders and attempted a second overthrow. By paying mobs to demonstrate, tricking Mossadegh into urging his supporters to stay home, and bribing and mobilizing officers against Mossadegh, he was able to force a military confrontation outside Mossadegh's home. With loyalist troops overwhelmed, Mossadegh was pulled out by aides, though he stated his wish of dying in the house instead of fleeing into hiding. He surrendered himself to the officers' club when Zahedi announced an order for his arrest on the radio. Mossadegh was imprisoned for 3 years, then put under house arrest until his death, and was buried in his own home so as to prevent a political furore. In 2013, the US government formally acknowledged the US role in the coup as a part of its policy initiative. And it goes on. Now, so even the Wikipedia entry on Mossadegh is admitting the coup and the role played by the CIA and the British MI6. So, when David Rose talks about shames America, the Guantanamo Bay, we shall read the actual contents, relevant contents of that piece. He obviously knows all about Iran, Muslims, and the incarceration for decades of the Muslims at Guantanamo Bay. And his headline is at least giving the impression that he believes that justice should be served and the people without any trial should be released, freed. So we shall go back there after reading this piece about Afghanistan and the US-Pakistan tension. Now, any ordinary reading of pieces in Fleet Street about Biden would suggest that Biden is wobbling, quite apart from the fact that policy-wise, he's still being moderate and he's not creating any controversies in the way that anywhere comparably done by Donald Trump. But Biden is a known kind of opponent to Muslim rights. So he's a supporter of the crusade. And Biden is on the record as having opposed Palestinians in particular. Now, any rational reading of the situation, of the statements by Biden and his supporters or propaganda machine about the withdrawal of the American troops from Afghanistan would suggest that he should be heading efforts to make friends with Pakistan, the Muslim country, not because it is Pakistan, but it is Muslim country, the biggest country that is helping and has helped and has been helping the Americans in relation to the situation in Afghanistan. And there is no evidence. There is no evidence that Joe Biden is in control of his faculties, his intellectual faculties, when he is coming across as showing contempt to Pakistan. Pakistan is not a country like another Muslim country, let's say Indonesia or Malaysia. These are the other two very populous Muslim countries with their own kind of broad frameworks of independence. Pakistan is the country that can do the most help and also be the cause of the lack of the most help, let's say. And this piece in the financial crimes actually is ambiguous in the middle of the piece. Although the first part does recognize more or less the basic kind of reason for the tension and the complaints by the Pakistanis that they can't understand why Biden is failing to contact Imran Khan. In the middle, it becomes vague and it becomes kind of either way, suggesting that Pakistan has to accept responsibility for the excesses of the Taliban and the other anti-American, anti-occupation, anti-imperialist activists and forces active in Afghanistan and on behalf of Afghanistan. Now that is the kind of pressure that CENTO and CETO, the reason I mentioned those, were asserting on Pakistan at the time. And one of the reasons why the military coup in 1958, staged by Ayub Khan in Pakistan, was additionally unpopular was because of the evidence that the military regime in Pakistan was acting as a stooge or as an ally or as an agency of the American foreign policy and the American imperialist agenda and operations in the region. That didn't include East Pakistan, but East Pakistan was part of the Pakistan that was physically located near the Afghanistan, near Iran, etc. And even now, today, 2021, the geopolitical location of Pakistan is very central because it is also linked with China, quite literally. That is not the case with Bangladesh, which was East Pakistan. China is not physically linked with East Pakistan or Bangladesh. So when David Rose talks about Guantanamo, it's not unconnected with the fact that there is an expectation by the American foreign kind of department of the imperialist agenda that a Muslim country, no matter how important it is, how significant it is demographically and otherwise, somehow owes the Americans some kind of service. And the purpose of the piece today in the Daily Mail by David Rose is explained here. And let's read the last few paragraphs of the David Rose piece. Now, this piece includes this confession by David Rose. For almost 20 years, says David Rose, America has been promising to put some of these men on trial in special courts, including the 9/11 architects. But the chief prosecutor has just resigned after 5 years in the job, and no trial date has been set. It is no accident that when Al Qaeda in Iraq, the murderous forerunner of the Islamic State, began beheading British and American hostages, they were shown on video wearing Guantanamo style orange suits. Over the years, numerous senior British and American intelligence officials have told me that the camp has turned out to be a highly effective recruiting sergeant for extremism. So, read that again. His last sentence in that paragraph: over the years, numerous senior British and American intelligence officials have told me, that is David Rose, that the camp has turned out to be a highly effective recruiting sergeant for extremism. So David Rose is very familiar with spies, American spies and British spies of today. Of course, no one is suggesting that dangerous criminals who wish the West harm should simply be released. Yet America is a country of laws, and many believe that the rightful place for its prisoners is not legal black holes on foreign shores. Democrat leaders say they want to close Guantanamo now, but they have a wafer-thin Senate majority. And the last month, Republican senators implored President Biden not to act, saying the camp still ensures justice. Trying to close it would be deeply divisive, and so far, Biden has given no indication he wishes to make the political effort to close it, that is. Major General Miller must be pleased. Running Guantanamo, he said when he retired, has given me the opportunity to help this nation win the global war on terror. Many would argue that the camp is instead a stain on America's conscience. Now, that is David Rose, who is very familiar with and is relied on by the American spying networks and the British counterparts, and he does the same. And that last counter, so called, is an absolutely stupid denial of international laws, because America has been flouting international laws about human rights, about justice, and so on. And there is no evidence that Rose recognizes those either. So both the Daily Mail piece about Guantanamo Bay, supposedly an outrage against the denial of justice for the victims who are all Muslims, and the Financial Times piece about Biden refusing to speak to Pakistan's Imran Khan, even though the Americans continue to admit that Pakistan has the biggest key role to play in making a success of the Americans withdrawing their troops from Afghanistan. So this program is called KhoodeelaarTV television channel. And our main description is we conduct world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. And I've just done the diagnosis of the Daily Mail and the Financial Times in terms of the situation in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, and in Guantanamo Bay, and the overall policy of the Biden-fronted American administration of showing contempt to the Muslims of the world, and David Rose's denial of the obligations that the UK remains under according to the various international treaties and charters that the UK has signed up to. Compared to the UK, the USA proportionately has signed up to less international treaties. And that is mainly because of the imperialist arrogance that successive American administrations have felt about America not being obliged to follow international rules and international requirements. We shall come to that in due course, of course. So we shall move to the other parts of the contents of the. Let's see the Daily Mail, what it does. Of course, the Daily Mail has got on its front page this teenager, Keely Hodgkinson, winning the 800-meter silver. And they've got this, as we said, about the display by the Daily Borisgraph, driving Borisgraph, about the Tokyo Olympic participants from Britain, Team GB. And there is a piece taking up a lot smaller space about the decision by Sajid Javid in his position as the Secretary of State in the name of health to order a review of women's hospital wards being allowed to be used by men. That is the latest action by the UK government about what is called transgender. But the man claiming to be transgender, transferring their gender identity, but retaining their physical gender identities as well at the same time. That is what has been the main kind of issue about this transgender. debate. And this is given as space by the Daily Mail, editorial page treatment to the woman called Nicholson. And she's writing under the heading, as Sajid Javid vows to review the issue, why I fear the sanctity of single-sex wards is under threat from trans rights. So this one will be featuring in high-profile pieces of controversy. The evidence suggests that this claim by men who claim to have the right to call themselves women because they want to call themselves women, this one will not succeed. There is overwhelming evidence that most people are opposed to these claims. And this is not an accidental opposition. It's a biological, cultural, social, societal opposition as well. And there is a related piece about Helen Mirren's opinion about aging in the Ephraim Hardcastle column, because L'Oreal has appointed Helen Mirren an ambassador, and she says that the company doesn't use the term anti-aging or age-related statements. But the Hardcastle column says a cursory glance suggests there are L'Oreal products on sale with anti-aging clearly stated on the box. And it sarcastically says, a senior moment, Dame Helen, ? So age and gender, very much part of the trading by the media, Fleet Street, etc. And here is a piece about the murder of a young person called Aya Hashim. Aya Hashim was murdered near her home in Blackburn in England by a gang, almost all of them of Pakistani origin, Muslim men. Abu Bakr Satya, Kashif Manzoor, Usman Satya, Ayaz Hussain, and Anthony Annis. Judy Chapman, 26, was found guilty of manslaughter in relation to Aya, but cleared of the attempted murder of Pasha Khan. The 7 men will be sentenced tomorrow. Chapman will be sentenced in October. Senior prosecutor Alan Richardson said, each is in their way responsible for the senseless killing of Aya Hashim. They refused to display any guilt. Now, we are talking about the role of the criminal courts. And this is a court, criminal court in the north, in Blackburn. And the convicted criminals have been almost all of them, except that one with the Anthony in his name, of Pakistani or Muslim origin or background. So we saw last week the end of the trial, the staged trial, as we call it, of the Poplar and Limehouse quote MP, Afsana Begum, at the East London court called Snaresbrook Crown Court. And we have since condemned the failure of the so-called prosecuting local council, Tower Hamlets Council, to make any comment about the raging housing corruption that continues, festers in the same council. Because they don't come across, in their statement after the so-called end of the trial, Tower Hamlets Council comes across as if it was impatient for the farce to end, and that it actually staged the farce like going through the motion, that is to say, to appear, to come across as doing something, but in fact intending the opposite. Now, we have said that the council, Tower Hamlets Council, like Lambeth Council, Southwark Council, Newham Council, Hackney, Islington, these are corrupt councils. Full stop. It's not a corruption or criminality in the controlling regime that affects only one type of crime, one type of service. That these councils are corrupt in relation to all their duties, all their obligations, all the services that they're funded to, they're publicly funded to provide to the public in their boroughs. And as anyone watching this program, not this particular edition necessarily, but any of the editions, would find that we condemn Tower Hamlets Council, and we have been condemning Tower Hamlets Council for years, since before anything to do with this staged trial of Afsana Begum. We first explain what we mean by staged trial. By staged trial, we mean that Tower Hamlets Council, which employed Afsana Begum during the years when Lutfur Rahman was incumbent in the corrupt post of the corrupt mayor. And I received more than one emails from Afsana Begum on behalf of Lutfur Rahman and on behalf of his so-called deputy at the time, Ohid Ahmed. And I can say now that in neither of those emails, or in none of those emails, if there are more than two, did Afsana Begum come across, number one, as conscientious and as being honest on the issue that she was supposedly sending the emails to me on behalf of either Lutfur Rahman or Ohid Ahmed. I found the view that Afsana Begum was one of the typically, how shall I say, unfit for purpose employees in Tower Hamlets Council. Because when I sent her the reply each time, or at the relevant time that the reply was warranted, she didn't come back. Any rational, reasonable, and honestly engaged employee of the council should have come back, because the issues that were under reference, although I had not contacted her. She had contacted me on behalf of the two I have mentioned. She should have actually followed up, because she sent me the emails concerned. Now, as anyone familiar with this campaign or with the presentation and the publication of the Khoodeelaar campaign or the other parts of the movement defending the community in the East End of London would know, I am the most prolific communicator, correspondent, commentator about Tower Hamlets Council and many other councils, many government departments. The amount of communications, the amount of contents that I have produced over a very long time is unparalleled in extent, in the extent of the contents and the depth of the investigation of the facts and the rejection of the lies of successive serial liars in posts as either chief executives or other employees, other posts in the corrupt Tower Hamlets Council. And Afsana Begum didn't impress in the emails that were sent to me from her named account in the council, that she was either fit for purpose or that she knew about the issues of such paramount importance that I was engaged in the demanding communications sent to Lutfur Rahman, and as his relevant agent at the time, Ohid Ahmed. Of course, Lutfur Rahman and Ohid Ahmed contradicted themselves without any idea that their behavior was being noticed by me. How stupid of them both. Ohid Ahmed contradicted himself many times verbally as well as in his email. And when I actually strictly fact checking, I visited him, he shows contemptuous ignorance of his duties. Because he was being paraded periodically as going on fact-checking walks with various named police personnel in Tower Hamlets. In his stated incumbents in the post as community safety post holder in the corrupt mayoral regime of Lutfur Rahman. So when the Langdon Park schoolboy Ajmal Ahmed was murdered by a number of fellow Bangladeshi origin persons who murdered him, I was surprised to find the Tower Hamlets Council had not really made any comments about the murder. Truthful comments about the murder. So I went to check with Ohid Ahmed, and he was contemptuously ignorant and uninterested in the whole of the issues. That was one of the issues that I had reason to communicate to Ohid Ahmed. The other was the very corruption regime in relation to housing. And in one of the communications, Ohid Ahmed behaved misleadingly. Now, I was not unaware of his misleading role, but the need for objectively establishing independently verifiable evidence meant that I had to give him the opportunity on the record. So I had to give him the opportunity on the record so that he could do his honest best to answer the overdue questions. So at the end of one of the sittings of the corrupt mayor's meeting cabinet, I gave Ohid Ahmed the opportunity to do his best. So he said to me that I should meet a woman called, I'll find her name and I'll update accordingly. This woman was in a post that was headed at directorate level by the crook and the liar called Aman Dalby. And this woman was a liar and a crook. So there was a heap of built up communications about these liars. And I must have sent dozens of communications about those lies and liars. And out of nowhere, I didn't expect Afsana because I didn't even know she existed. So I got an email, a number of emails, and these were either on behalf of Lutfur Rahman or on behalf of Ohid Ahmed. Remember, these were on dates before the 23rd of April 2015. That was the date when Lutfur Rahman's any claim to be the incumbent in the post of elected mayor was severed by the ruling, cut by the ruling issued by Richard Morey, Mawrey, licensed law trader, in other words, also being called a barrister, but he was the person who was authorized to sit as the election commissioner to consider the petition that had been procedurally filed by the 4 petitioners against Lutfur Rahman. They filed a petition in June 2014 demanding the declaration that the 22nd of May 2014 so-called mayoral election was null and void and Lutfur Rahman was not elected. It took just under a year from that date in June for the election commissioner to finally declare that Lutfur Rahman was not elected, and he banned Lutfur Rahman from elected office for 5 years. We shall come later to discussing why the elected mayor post was itself corrupt and criminal, and why the Tower Hamlets Council itself should be scrapped. And all of this evidence about the behavior of Lutfur Rahman, Ohid Ahmed, Aman Dalby, and the several emails sent on behalf of Lutfur Rahman and Wahid Ahmad by Afsana Begum. As I said, I didn't know her existence at the time. Now those emails were on dates before the 23rd of April 2015, the date when Richard Morey declared that Lutfur Rahman was not elected on the 22nd of May. Now, if Afsana Begum was acting at that time as sensitive, responsive, responsible, law-abiding, and honest about the various allegations that existed, allegations that I had repeatedly made against the various post holders in the council. She would have followed up my response to her, and she would have given her honest, truthful, and caring statement, which would mean that she would have said that she knew of the various post holders in the council who were in posts to ensure that honest and careful and caring duty was being carried out and observed to meet the lawful requirements of people who had been caused severe obstructions, denials of their rights in relation to the council's duties about housing. Because the communications that were created included a lot of the lies told by the housing options. Remember that options. That is the so-called department of the Tower Hamlets Council, which had serial crooks and criminals in posts, which still has serial crooks and criminals in posts. That was used and is being used to stage dishonest kind of statements. So the housing options was a criminal, was a section, was a part of the criminals in paid posts in the council. And those criminals were in post and are in post today, 4th of August 2021, to tell lies about housing. Now remember, even if you look at one particular borough like Tower Hamlets, you are looking at hundreds of kind of communications by every single individual who has been blocked or obstructed or lied to or lied about their various stages of housing needs. Now, while these liars are being paid to lie, they are victims. The victims of the lies and lying are not being paid. In fact, they are being denied the time, the resources, and the energies that are required to maintain the very distressing series and serial communications with a set of paid liars who don't have anything to lose. The main task is to block and obstruct and to deny and to bar and to deprive service to the people who need the service most urgently and most sincerely. So Afsana Begum did not show any sign that she understood any of the fact-based references that she was supposedly writing the emails to me about. And when the housing options liars were kind of mentioned in the prosecution's case against Afsana Begum, the defense didn't kind of argue about anything to do with the housing options. The defense just said that Afsana Begum had communicated to housing options the defense didn't say that the housing options had a history of lying, which is what her defense was implying in relation to her particular case. But it didn't specify that it was a section which had liars in place. And the so-called prosecution, James Marsland, didn't press the point. That is to say, he didn't say, why do you think the housing options didn't take note or make notes of the communications? Is it usual for that section to just ignore communications that are of central importance to somebody's housing because that person, according to the claim by the defense, was in desperate situation for urgent emergency housing because she was being harassed and she was being treated to likely potential domestic violence and likely, well, it's not spelled out, but it was included in the possibilities that she could have been, or she would have been, or she would have been likely to have been, or being murdered under what is called honor killing. Because the burden of the image of a helpless victim of possible honor-related murder or killing was painted before the jurors in the court on behalf of Afsana Begum. So when a council, housing options, is being given the relevant information, there was no reading of the actual quoted or quotable statement that Afsana Begum made to the housing options. But it is assumed in the full context if she told the truth that she did feel all these threats and harassments, that she would have told the housing options that that is what is about to happen and I desperately need help. So for a council, housing options to ignore something like a possible honor killing and to fail to protect or do the best available help to protect the likely victim of a possible honor killing. How wrong is that? How scandalous would that be? How outrageous would such a blanking would be? That is to say, a complete non-recording of such a set of communications would be. Why didn't James Marland or Marsland, why didn't the prosecution, so-called barrister, the licensed law trader, James Marsland, why didn't he pursue that? And why didn't the defense from matrix chambers of so-called barristers, Helen Laws, why didn't she pursue that? And why didn't that register to the press association, the main news agency that covers and has covered this particular case and which has been the main basis, the main source of most of the versions that have been published online by the Daily Mail, by the Scum, the Sun, the Guardian, the East London, Idiotizer? Why haven't any of them focused on that? In the strategy that came across from the mention of the possible honor-based violence that Afsana Begum's kind of side adopted, they must have thought that this was a desperate and very dangerous kind of situation and that it should be highlighted. So why didn't the newspapers mention or focus on that? And why on Tuesday, that is yesterday, 3rd of August 2021, the Channel 4 News propaganda piece that was run by Channel 4 News to help Afsana Begum, why didn't they mention that? It looked like Channel 4 was itself impatient to just do the routine and get away from that particular topic of the trial of Afsana Begum and her, as they kind of claimed acquittal. What about the hundreds of thousands of communications that people needing housing, being on the waiting list, being in overcrowded conditions, sent to the Townless Council, which is mainly directed to the housing options every year? What about the behavior of the housing options to the hundreds of thousands of communications? They didn't mention that. They didn't mention the point about the possible honor-based violence. And they didn't mention why, even if the brother-in-law of Afsana Begum's former partner or former husband, currently Councillor Ehtesham Haq, no relation to me. Why, even if Ehtesham Haq's brother-in-law actually did file a complaint against Afsana Begum, why would that itself be evidence of prejudice against her? Isn't it conceivable that the alleged brother-in-law, unidentified so far, of Ehtesham Haq actually believed, on the evidence before him, on the facts known to him, that a wrong or a series of wrongs had been done? Why would his reporting such wrongdoing constitute any evidence or ground that he was being malicious? Channel 4 News didn't ask Afsana Begum that question. In fact, they used that reference to the alleged complaint by the alleged brother-in-law by Ehtesham Haq as itself constituting evidence of the hostility and prejudice and conspiracy and bias against Afsana Begum. That cannot be true, because Afsana Begum has no exemption, never had any exemption in law to break the law or to manufacture a series of scenarios that make her come across as if she was the victim when the evidence otherwise showed that she was committing a series of wrongs, breaking laws. So, we have the housing options about Afsana Begum. We have just dealt with it now. But the housing options is also the same branch of Hrs Council that took part in a series of published lies about housing. Nothing to do with Afsana Begum case, nothing to do with her particular references to that. Because as I said earlier, yesterday and before, the Channel 4 television company, organization, not Channel 4 News as such, which did the lying yesterday, but Channel 4 News actually did the same line, the same agenda. That is to present the crooks in the Hrs Council's housing options as being above the law and as being somehow entitled to break the law. Because the Channel 4 organization broadcast in the last 10 years at least 3 series called How to Get a Council House. And contrary to the title, that was actually part of a propaganda to tell viewers that council housing was not available and people are not entitled to get a council house. So it's not just about the exchanges or alleged exchanges or contracts between Afsana Begum and the housing option, but it's the whole operation. The housing option is itself misleading, should be called no option for housing. And instead of calling the series How to Get a Council House, it should have been how council housing has been scrapped and how not to apply for council housing and so on. This is outrageously extensive serial perpetration of criminality done by Hrs Council by using housing options as an agency for lying. We shall update by chapter and verse in due course about those series. Now, moving to the operation, the propaganda operation that is run in accordance with the agenda that suits the racist liar John Biggs, who has been imposed as the incumbent in the corrupt mayor post. They issued a statement after the so-called end of the so-called trial of Afsana Begum at the Snaresbrook Crown Court. Now, this time, it is absolutely important to read what the criminals said. And I'm calling John Biggs a criminal. When the lying piece on Channel 4 News on Tuesday was kind of broadcast, it was fronted by Krishnan Gurumurthy. And Gurumurthy himself read the piece at the end of the so-called interview by the Channel 4 News reporter with Afsana Begum. And the part of the statement by the corrupt John Biggs's kind of operation, it sounded like they couldn't leave the topic fast enough. That's what they did. So let's see what the actual text of the lying piece by the corrupt Hrs Council says. So this one is the part of the statement that, or probably the Tower Hamlet spokesperson said, "We have a duty to investigate any allegations of housing fraud. In order to ensure public money is spent correctly and that those waiting on our housing register are treated fairly. After reviewing the evidence with the benefit of independent legal advice, it was found to be strong enough to bring the matter to court, where it was agreed there was a case to answer." And then the Guardian quotes, "We fully accept the verdict that justice has run its course and the matter is now closed." Justice has not run its course at all, because there is a thing called miscarriage of justice. There is a thing called the jurors were not fully briefed or whatever, and that we shall appeal. Nobody has said that they would appeal. And justice has not run its course, as we have explained. The statement that Alibor Chaudhry made to me about the main crook, Colin Cormack, that was a statement that Alibor Chaudhry made during 2015. Alibor Chaudhry made that statement to me spontaneously. That is to say, I didn't know what he was going to say, and I didn't expect what he did say, that he would be saying that. Alibor Chaudhry said to me, within months or within a year of Richard Morey declaring Alibor Chaudhry banned, as well as Lutfur Rahman being banned, that Colin Cormack had always wanted to obstruct the rights, the housing rights, to be delivered to me. I didn't expect Alibor Chaudhry to say that, and I had not prompted him to say that. I had no idea that he would say that. And he did say that at a coincidental meeting. We bumped into each other in Brick Lane. And the most important thing Alibor Chaudhry said to me was that Colin Cormack never wanted me to get the housing. Now, this is not something that took place over a few minutes or few seconds. This was something that was done by Colin Cormack starting from April 1996. So 96, 97, 98, 99, 2000. So that is 19 years. Over 19 years, Colin Cormack lied. Think about that. Colin Cormack was the post holder in the housing options. And before the housing options was created, he was in the relevant post. And he, Colin Cormack, was the one that was mentioned to me by Sylvie Pierce. Sylvie Pierce was the chief executive at the time in 1996. And Sylvie Pierce's PA was a woman, Carol Marchant, who conducted almost all the communications regarding Colin Cormack's behavior and the contemporaneous complaints that were being made by me against Cormack over the period up to the time when mysteriously Carol Marchant left the council in 2011, which we shall be discussing in detail in due course as well. Because I think Carol Marchant was given the sack. Carol Marchant was given the sack because she was in fact the only employee in the council who was not, on those references, lying. In fact, being in the chief executive's office, Carol Marchant, of course, carried internally significant recognition. So when she was the only one who confirmed and reiterated what I was saying, the rest of the council employees, the liars, clocked on, and they thought that she had to be retired from the council. That was the only way to stop the lies being continued. And my absolutely truthful claims, assertions, demands, representations being blocked. That is what they were doing. So when Afsana Begum came into the frame of references and she sent me the emails on behalf of Lutfur Rahman and on behalf of Ohid Ahmad, she was dealing with something that had begun before she even left primary school. I can check that. What age was she in 1996? If she is 31 now, then she would have been a child, infant, in 1996. So she was actually being asked to tell lies to me by Lutfur Rahman and Ohid Ahmad about something that she could not check. She was not able to check. Remember, you are looking at part A. You are looking at part A of the Khoodeelaar television channel, diagnosing world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. And what we are doing here is saying that the Guardian, the Daily Mail, the Scum, the East London Idiotizer, Channel 4 have all been lying and have lied for the crooks in Tower Owners Council at various stages surrounding the farce of the trial staged at Snaresbrook Crown Court on various counts of housing fraud perpetrated by Afsana Begum, as the prosecution said. And we have said that this was not a trial of Hrs Council fraud. Not even 1% of the truth of the depth of corruption and criminality that goes on in Hrs Council. As I said, one of the lies that Hrs Council perpetrated about housing in the series How to Get a Council House was to persistently conceal the big robbery of trillions of pounds worth of benefit taken away from the council housing by the transfer of the council housing stock. The huge numbers, thousands of properties belonging to the council housing stock were given away to the gang called the Poplaharka and the smaller gang called the Tar Hamlets Community Housing. This was something that by any reasonable numerical cost benefit analysis would have to be the main feature of any discussion about the availability of housing stock. Yet the series called How to Get a Council House, broadcast by the criminally collusive Channel 4, left out thousands of council housing stock were being made unavailable by the transfer to Poplaharka and to Tar Hamlets Community Housing. This wasn't mentioned. So how could anyone make a logical case about availability or otherwise of council housing? Remember, you are listening to the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. None of this is available in any papers ever. And no book has been written about this or similar. And none of the so-called environmental or housing or communities, faculties at any of the universities, including Oxford or Cambridge, or the rest of the so-called Russell group of universities, none of these operations will have even 1% of what I'm talking about. So you are listening to and watching world exclusive program that is literally world exclusive. Now we shall go to corruption of a different kind. And on page 9 of the bribing Boris Johnson graph, daily bribing Boris Johnson graph, also known as or AKA the Daily Telegraph, on page 9 of the paper is a piece about this woman. This woman has been described in the headline by the Daily Mail as Taiwanese, but she ethnically, of course, belongs to the group very similar to the main stock of the Chinese. So we shall move to the main point in the item. It's Oxford porters stop me because of my skin color, says Senior Don. She's not only a senior Don, but she is the Dean of the university's Faculty of Laws. And here is the piece that is written by the daily bribing Boris Graf's education editor called Camilla Turner. The Dean of Oxford University's law faculty has revealed that porters have questioned whether she has the right to enter the college, as she calls for more anti-racism training. Professor Mindy Chen Wishart, who is from Taiwan, said she was challenged by porters all the time when entering Oxford colleges, adding that it happens so frequently that I would normally never even register it. She said it is both alienating and exhausting to be constantly challenged for looking, quote, out of place. This happens a lot in Oxford, Professor Chen Wishart said. Every time you get into a college, you have to get past porters, facilities managers, whatever. People of color are challenged or searched. People will always say they're just doing their job. I would really like to understand why they are so good at doing their job when people of color are concerned. Now I shall read more of that from Mindy Chen Wishart. I go back to the 1980s and I say, and I've said this before, but I say it again in relation to this statement by Mindy Chen Wishart. I was carrying a GLC pass to enter the county hall. And I had that pass issued to me, in effect, from late 1982, when I had been elected by the community in Tower Hamlets to a series of committees in the Inner London Education Authority, which itself was a big, constitutionally, committee of the Greater London Council, which means that the members of committees, whoever, who were entitled to attend meetings and entered the county hall, had to have a card or pass issued. So my pass was not unlike the pass that anyone else had. So I had my photograph on the pass and the description, my name, etc., etc. So whenever I would go to the county hall, I would be given extra searches and I would be asked extra questions. And people who were not even members of the committee and who had no automatic entitlement to enter, which I had, but who were not Asian or African, would not be treated in that way. And I have had similar experiences trying to go to the what used to be called the headquarters of the Commission for Racist Enslavement, as I call it, but it is called Commission for Racial Equality, which is situated near Victoria Station in London. So whenever I would like to enter, I would be given the heavy treatment of being searched and asked extra questions. And I had the name registered at the appropriate department, etc. And you can extrapolate and you can multiply the examples. So what Mindy Chen Wishart is also talking about, she said the senior officials at Oxford are increasingly aware of the importance of diversity and inclusion, adding that a pro-vice chancellor recently interviewed her about her experiences at the university as a person of color. I know Oxford is very keen to do something about race, and I'm very keen to engage with them, but only if they actually want to do something. So she's not convinced that they will really do something to change. Now, what are we looking at? This is a woman, Taiwanese origin or whatever, and she is not just an accidental visitor to any of the premises. She is the head of the Faculty of Laws, for heaven's sake. So how many treaties, international treaties, that ban discrimination are the Oxford University porters and staff breaking? And as I said before, the UK remains actively signatory, signed up to literally thousands of international treaties and declarations and conventions and agreements, etc. So we shall be continuing. This is just over 2 hours, I think. It's 11:22 GMT on Wednesday, the 4th of August 2021, that we are ending this part A of the Khoodeelaar campaign, Khoodeelaar television channel, doing the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street and the media. And of course, neither the Daily Bribing Boris Graph nor the Daily Mail, two of the outlets that report on Mindy Chen Wishart, talk about the international treaties that I keep regularly talking about. So we shall elaborate on that and update on that in due course.